The prosecutor knew the man was innocent. He had the thing in his own file. He hid it, won the conviction, and sent an innocent father to prison for 25 years. Then something almost unheard of in America happened. The prosecutor went to prison too. Before dawn, Michael Morton kissed his sleeping wife Christine goodbye and left for work. August 13, 1986. Williamson County, Texas. Hours later, she was found beaten to death in their own bed. Their 3-year-old son had been home. Michael had not. There was no weapon. No fingerprints. No history of violence. Nothing that tied Michael to the killing. What there was a grieving husband who could not prove where he had been, and an investigation that had already picked its suspect. The rest would be built to fit. Prosecutor Ken Anderson built the trial around a story. A husband, angry that his wife had turned him down the night before, snapped and beat her to death. There was no real proof of it. But told with confidence, in a courtroom, a story can outweigh evidence. In 1987, the jury convicted Michael Morton of murdering his wife. The sentence was life in prison. He was led away still swearing he was innocent, leaving behind a murdered wife, and a young son who would grow up being told his father was the killer. What no one in that courtroom knew was what the state had chosen not to show. Because inside the prosecution's own file sat evidence that pointed away from Michael Morton, and toward a stranger. Evidence the defense was never handed, and the jury never saw. Michael's 3-year-old son had witnessed the attack. He told his grandmother what he saw. A monster, he said, not his father, had hurt. He said plainly that Daddy was not home when it happened. That statement was written down. And buried. Had reported something too. In the days before the murder, a man kept parking a green van behind the Morton house, then into the woods. The police had written it down. The jury would never hear a single word about it. There was still more. Christine's credit card had been used in another city after her death. A check bearing her forged signature had been cashed. Both pointed to someone still out there, alive and moving. All of it stayed sealed inside the prosecutor's file. This is the heart of the case, and of the law itself. Under a rule called Brady, prosecutors must hand the defense any evidence that points to innocence. It is not a courtesy. It is a constitutional command. And the man prosecuting Michael Morton chose to break it. Michael Morton went to prison for a murder he did not commit. Years passed. His son, raised by relatives, stopped visiting, and eventually asked to change his name. Michael lost his wife, his freedom, and slowly his family. Still, he insisted he was innocent. For most wrongly convicted people, that is where the story ends. Buried under a verdict no one will ever reopen. But a team of lawyers from the Innocence Project took his case, and asked for the one thing the state had fought for years to prevent. A DNA test. The fight just to run that test took 6 years. Prosecutors in the same county resisted it at every turn. They did not want the evidence examined. Finally a court ordered testing on an item recovered near the scene the morning after the murder. A blue bandana. Bandana had been found near the Morton home the day after Christine died. On it, the lab discovered 2 things. Christine Morton's blood. And the DNA of a man who was not her husband. A stranger had been at that scene, and left himself behind. The genetic profile was run through a national database. It matched a man named Mark Allen Norwood, a drifter with a record, living far from Texas. His DNA sat on the bandana stained with Christine's blood. Michael Morton's DNA was nowhere on it. October 4, 2011, after nearly 25 years, Michael Morton walked out of prison a free man. That December, he was formally innocent. But freedom answered only half of the question. Why had the truth stayed buried for a quarter of a century? Because the answer was not an honest mistake. When his lawyers finally pried open the old files, they found the witness reports, the son's words, the green van, all of it. Evidence that had been in the prosecutor's hands, and kept from the defense at trial. The prosecutor was Ken Anderson. By now he was no longer a district attorney. He had become a sitting judge, respected and powerful. And then Texas did something it had almost never done before. It put a former prosecutor on trial for what he did to an innocent man. A special court of inquiry examined the record and concluded that Anderson had deliberately concealed evidence and misled the original trial judge. He was charged with contempt of court and tampering. The man who hid the truth would now answer for it, in a courtroom of his own. 2013, Ken Anderson surrendered his law license, resigned his judgeship, and was sentenced to jail. He stood behind the same kind of that sent an innocent man to for a quarter century. He remains the only prosecutor in America jailed for this kind of misconduct. 10 days. That was the sentence, and he served only 5. For a career built on a hidden folder, and 25 stolen years, 5 nights in a cell. To some, it was justice arriving late. To many others, it was proof of how little a prosecutor truly risks. Michael Morton turned his loss into law. He walked the halls of the Texas Capitol, and in 2013 the state passed the Michael Morton Act, forcing prosecutors to open their files to the defense. The rule that had failed him now carried his name. Mark Norwood, the man whose DNA was on the bandana, was convicted of Christine Morton's murder in 2013 and sentenced to life. He was later linked to the killing of another woman years earlier. A second death that an honest first trial might have prevented. The lesson of this file is not that a jury was fooled. It is that the system worked exactly as designed, and still condemned an innocent man, because one person with power chose to hide what he was sworn to reveal. The danger here was never doubt. It was concealment. The evidence existed. It always had. It sat in a folder while a father lost his wife, his son, and half of his life. This has been Verdict Files. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. The truth was never missing. It was hidden. The next file is already open.